Digital transformation time. Digital transformation time.
Quick promise. If you're a founder, this episode changes how you read every requirement your team writes, from a box-ticking chore into the thing that decides whether you can certify and scale it all. If you're a tech lead, you'll get a concrete way to tell a real requirement from a wish, and why that distinction protects you when an auditor or a customer comes asking. I've built requirement and traceability systems for aviation and nuclear environments where a vague requirement isn't sloppy, it's dangerous. Let me show you why the framing matters this much. Here's how most growing companies treat requirements. Someone writes a document at the start of the project, a spec, a list of the product shall do X, everyone reviews it once, nods, and then it goes stale. Engineering moves on, makes 100 decisions, the design evolves, and the requirement documents sits in a folder increasingly fictional. By the time you ship, the requirements describe a product you didn't actually build. That's treating requirements as a documentation, something you produce, file, and forget. And it feels harmless because nothing breaks immediately. The problem is what requirements are supposed to be doing while you ignore them. So let's reframe it properly. A control system is something that keeps reality matching intent. It senses what's actually happening, compares it to what should happen, and flags the gap. That is exactly what requirements are meant to do across your whole product. They are not the description at the start, they are the reference everything is measured against, the whole way through. They do three jobs. First, they define the target precisely enough to be testable. Not the drone should be reliable. That's a wish. You can't test it. But the drone shall complete 500 flight cycles without component failure. Now it's a target. The test for a real requirement is simple. Can you prove whether you met it? If not, it's not a requirement yet. Second, they anchor every downstream decision. Every design choice, every trade-off should trace back to a requirement that justifies it. When a requirement is the anchor, you can always answer why is the product like this. When it isn't, your product becomes a pile of decisions nobody can explain. Third, they generate evidence. In a regulated world, you don't just have to build the right thing, you have to prove you did. Requirements are what verification and validation test against. No clear requirement, no clear evidence. And no evidence means no certification, no matter how good the actual product is. This isn't a new insight. It's just one most companies skip. The foundational reference here is Gautel and Finkelstein, who decades ago defined what they called the requirements traceability problem. The difficulty of following the life of a requirement both forwards and backwards, from where it came from to everything it affects. They named it as a core problem in engineering long before it became a certification headache. What I'm adding is what it looks like when the problem walks into a fast-growing deep tech company that didn't plan for it. Let me make requirements as control concrete by showing what breaks when you treat them as documentation instead. Three failures I've seen again and again. 1. The untestable requirement. The system shall be user-friendly. It passes review because it sounds reasonable, then at validation, two engineers disagree about whether it's met, and there is no way to settle it because it was never testable. You've built in an argument you can't win, right at the moment certification depends on it. 2. The orphan change. Someone improves the design, genuinely better, but never links it back to the requirement it changes. Now your product is better than your requirements say, which sounds fine until an auditor finds the mismatch and asks which one is true. You can't answer. That's not a quality problem, it's a control problem. 3. The silent drift. No single change is dramatic, but over months the product and the requirements quietly diverge. Nobody decided to let them drift. That was just no control system catching the gap. And the day you discover it is always the worst possible day, during an audit, a due diligence, or a failure investigation. If you're a founder, here is your leverage point, and it costs you almost nothing except insistence. You don't need to write requirements yourself. You need to make one thing non-negotiable in your culture. That a requirement isn't done until it's testable and owned. That single standard, held early, prevents the untestable requirements, the orphan changes, and the silent drift before they compound. It's the difference between a product you can certify and a product you merely hope is right. And like everything in this course, it's not a tool you buy, it's a standard you decide to hold. So, requirements are your control system. They define the target, anchor decisions, and generate evidence. But a control system is only as good as what happens when something changes. And in a real engineering company, things change constantly. The moment a requirement or a design changes, you need a disciplined way to handle it, or all that traceability falls apart in a week. That's a change management. And there is a proven approach to doing it without drowning your team in bureaucracy. It's called CMII, and it's the next episode. I'll show you how to do the change control that's strict where it matters and light everywhere else. Recap. Requirements and documentation you file and forget. They're the control system that keeps your product matching your intent. They define a testable target, anchor every decision, and generate the evidence you need to certify. Treat them as paperwork, and you get untestable requirements, orphan changes, and silent drift discovered on the worst possible day. Treat them as control, and you stay certifiable by design. If this reframed how you see your own specs, subscribe. Next, I show you how to control change without the bureaucracy. And in the comments, be honest. How many of your current requirements could you actually prove you've met? That number is usually
Digital transformation time. Digital transformation time.
as always, two promises. If you're a founder, you'll stop seeing change control as a red tape that slows your team and start seeing it as a thing that lets you move fast without breaking what you've already certified. If you're a tech lead, you'll get a concrete model for handling change that auditors respect and engineers don't hate. I've run change processes in aviation and nuclear, places where a non-controlled change can ground an aircraft, or worse. And also in a startup that couldn't afford a change bureaucracy. The trick is the same in both. Control the change, not the people. There are two ways change goes wrong, and they're opposite. The first is no control. Someone changes a part, a spec, a process, and just does it. No record, no impact check, no one downstream knows. This feels fast and free right up until the change breaks something 3 steps away that nobody connected. This is the world we saw in Module 1, the broken links, the silent drift. It doesn't fail loudly, it fails later, expensively. The second failure is the overcorrection, bureaucracy. Burned by chaos, a company makes every change, however trivial, go through a heavy approval process. Forums, committees, weeks of waiting to move a bracket 2 millimeters. Now change is controlled, but it's so painful that engineers start routing around it. Undocumented tweaks, off the books fixes, and you're quietly back to no control, just slower and with worse morale. Both extremes end in the same place, changes that aren't really controlled. There is a model built specifically to escape both traps. It's called CM2 or CMII or Configuration Management 2. It came out of the aerospace and defense world in the 1980s, developed by what was then an Institute of Configuration Management, because traditional change control couldn't keep up with product complexity. Don't let the name scare you. Strip it down and CM2 rests on a few ideas that any small team can use. First, keep your requirements clear, concise, and valid, always. CM2 is almost obsessed with this, and rightly. Change control is meaningless if you don't have a clean statement of what correct is. The reference everything changes against has to be trustworthy first. Second, the heart of it, the closed loop change process. A change isn't done when someone makes it. It's done when the loop is closed. The change is requested, its impact is assessed across everything it touches, a decision is made and recorded, it's implemented, and every affected document and baseline is updated to match. Open loops, changes that get made but never fully propagated, are exactly the silent drift that kills you in an audit. CM2 says no open loops. Third, configurations must conform to their requirements in every case, not most of the time. The product, the documents, and the requirements always tell the same story. When they don't, that's not a paperwork gap. That's a loss of control. The source here is the CM2 body of work itself, the Institute of Configuration Management, now known as the Institute for Process Excellence. And there is one line from the CM2 material I want you to carry out of this video, because it's the whole philosophy of this entire course in 6 words. CM is the process. Processes must lead. Tools enable. They wrote that decades ago, and it's exactly what I keep telling you. You don't buy change control as a software. You design it as a process, and then a tool enforces it. Get that backwards and you've bought an expensive way to stay out of control. Now the part everyone actually wants. How do you get CM2's rigor without the bureaucracy people associate with it? The secret is that strict and heavy are not the same thing. You can have airtight control that's also fast. Here's how. First, tier your changes by impact. Not every change deserves the same process. That's the mistake that creates bureaucracy. A change that touches a certified, safety-critical, or customer-facing baseline gets the full closed loop. A change with no downstream impact gets a fast track. CM2 actually has this built in, a fast track path. The rigor scales with the risk, not with your anxiety. Second, make impact assessment real, not theater. The slow part of change control is usually figuring out what does this touch. If your requirements, designs, and BOMs are connected, the digital thread from Module 1, that question answers itself in minutes instead of meetings. Connection is what makes strict control fast. Disconnection is what makes it a committee. Third, decide in one place, fast. The closed loop needs a decision and the record. Second, make impact assessment real. The slow part of change control is usually figuring out what does this touch. If your requirements, designs, and BOMs are connected, the digital thread from Module 1, that question answers itself in minutes instead of meetings. Connection is what makes strict control fast. Disconnection is what makes it a committee. Third, decide in one place, fast. The closed loop needs a decision and a record. It does not need 5 separate sign-offs across 5 calendars. A small standing change board that can actually decide closes the loop in a conversation. You keep the record, you drop the delay. Fourth, automate the propagation. The most error-prone, moral-killing part of change is updating everything the change touches by hand. When your systems are connected, an approved change propagates. The baseline updates, the affected documents flag themselves. The human makes the decision, the system closes the loop. That's the difference between control that when your systems are connected, an approved change propagates. The baseline updates, the affected documents flag themselves. The human makes the decision, the system closes the loop. That's the difference between control that depends on someone not being tired at 6 p.m. and control that just holds. Founder takeaway. Your instinct when things break is to add process, more approvals, more forms. That instinct is what creates the bureaucracy your team will route around. The real move is the opposite. Invest in connection, not approvals. A connected operation lets you be strict and fast at the same time, because the system does the impact analysis and the propagation. So the question to ask your team isn't, do we have enough sign-offs? It's when we change something, does the system tell us everything it touches automatically? If the answer is no, that's where your money goes, not into more committees. So the requirements are your control system, and CM2's closed loop is how you change them without losing control. But there is one word I've used in almost every sentence and haven't fully unpacked: baseline. The closed loop updates the baseline. Conformance is measured against the baseline. Get baselines wrong, and none of this works. You literally can't reproduce or certify your own product. So the next episode is all about baseline discipline, what a baseline really is, and how a small team keeps engineering intent and approvals reconstructible. It's the quiet foundation under everything in this module. Recap. Change goes wrong two ways: no control or bureaucracy, and both end in uncontrolled change. CM2 escapes both with clear requirements, a closed-loop change process, and conformance in every case. And you make it light, not heavy, by tiering changes, connecting your data, so impact analysis is instant, deciding in one place, and automating propagation. Remember the line: processes must lead, tools enable. If this changed how you think about change in your own company, subscribe. Next, I unpack baselines, the foundation under all of it. And in the comments, in your company, when something changes, how long does it take to know everything it affects? Minutes or a meeting? That number tells you how connected you really are.
Transformation time. Digital transformation time.
Two promises. If you're a founder, you'll understand why "we have all the files" is not the same as "we can reproduce our product," and why the gap is an existential risk in regulated work. If you're a tech lead, you'll get a practical sense of how to set and hold baselines so that on any day you can answer "what exactly did we build?" against which approved version, and who signed it off. I learned this the hard way, in a program where a product was built, flew, and then couldn't be reliably rebuilt on another site. The difference between those two states is baseline discipline. Let's define it plainly. A baseline is a fixed, agreed snapshot of your product's definition at a moment in time. The requirements, the design, the BOM, the documents, frozen and approved as a known good reference. Think of it like a save point in a game. Everything keeps moving afterwards, but you have a point you can always return to and say, "this exact configuration was agreed, also reviewed, and correct." Without save points, you're playing a game you can never reload. And in engineering, that means you can never prove what correct was. The keyword is frozen. A baseline isn't your latest files. Those are always moving. A baseline is a deliberate stake in the ground. As of this approval, this is the definition. Changes after that don't quietly overtime it. They create the next baseline through the closed loop we covered last episode. That's why baselines and change control are two halves of one thing. The baseline is the noun, change control is the verb. Here's the illusion that sinks companies. We don't need formal baselines. All our files are saved. Saved files feels like safety. They are not a baseline. Let me show you why. A shared drive full of files tells you what exists. It does not tell you which version was approved, what they were approved against, who approved them, or which set actually goes together as a coherent, buildable configuration. A folder is a pile. A baseline is a frozen, approved, internally consistent set. The difference is invisible on a normal day and catastrophic on the day it matters. Picture it concretely. You built something 6 months ago. Now you need to rebuild it. A second site, a customer order, a failure investigation. You open the drive. There are 5 versions of the key drawing. 3 have edits with no dates. The change that mattered was approved in an email that's now buried. The person who knew is gone. Every file is present. You still cannot reconstruct what you actually built. That's not a missing files problem. It's a missing baseline problem. And no amount of storage fixes it. The discipline behind this has a formal home. In configuration management, the foundational activity is configuration identification, setting and maintaining baselines that define the system at any point in time. So changes can be identified, documented, and tracked across the whole life cycle. That's the backbone of standards like ISO 10007 and the systems engineering body of work. What I'm translating for you is the startup size version. You don't need the full defense contractor apparatus. You need the principle: deliberate, approved, frozen reference points, applied with a discipline by a small team. The principle is non-negotiable. The bureaucracy around it is optional. You need the principle: deliberate, approved, frozen reference points, applied with discipline by a small team. The principle is non-negotiable. The bureaucracy around it is optional. So how does a 3-person team keep a real baseline discipline without drowning? 4 practical rules. 1. Baseline at meaningful moments, not constantly. You don't freeze everything every day. That's noise. You set a baseline at points that matter. A design review passed, a prototype release to build, a configuration shipped. Each one is a deliberate, this is a grid. Few clear, meaningful save points beat 1,000 autosaves nobody trusts. 2. A baseline isn't real until it's approved and owned. Storing a snapshot isn't baselining. Anyone can copy a folder. A baseline carries a decision. Someone with authority said, "This set is correct as of now," and that approval is recorded with their name and the date. No owner, no approval, no baseline. Just files with ambition. No owner, no approval, no baseline, just files with ambition. 3. A baseline is internally consistent. The requirements, the design, the BOM, and in a baseline all describe the same product. If your drawing says one thing and your BOM says another, you don't have a baseline. You have a contradiction you'll discover at the worst time. Consistency is the whole point. It's the set that goes together. 4. Every change is from and baseline. 4. Every change is from baseline and to a baseline. This connects straight back to last episode's closed loop. A change isn't floating. It modifies a known starting baseline and produces a known next one. Do this and you get something powerful almost for free. At any moment, you can trace the full history of how your product's definition evolved, save point by save point. That's reconstructability. That's what an auditor, a second sight, and a failure investigation all need. Founder takeaway. And it's blunt. We have all the files is the sentence that precedes a disaster in regulated work. Saved is not the same as reproducible. The one standard worth enforcing early, before you have a big team, before it's painful to introduce, is that every product configuration you really care about gets a deliberate, approved, frozen baseline. It costs you almost nothing now. It saves you a program later. And that closes Module 2. Pull the 3 episodes together. Requirements are your control system, the definition of correct. Change control is how you evolve the definition without losing control, the closed loop. And baselines are the frozen, approved reference points the whole thing pivots on, what lets you reproduce and prove your product. Requirements, change, baseline. That's configuration control, sys for a team that can't afford an army. With this in place, your product is reconstructible by design. And that is what makes certification possible. In the next module, we connect all of this across your systems: ALM, PLM, ERP, and MES. So the control we just built doesn't stop at one tool. I'll see you there. Recap. A baseline is a frozen, approved, consistent snapshot of your product's definition, a safe point you can always return to. A folder of files is not a baseline. It tells you what exists, not what was built or approved. A small team holds discipline with 4 rules: baseline at meaningful moments, approve and own it, keep it internally consistent, and run every change from one baseline to the next. Do that, and your product becomes reproducible and certifiable by design. If this module reframed how you see your own engineering data, subscribe. Next, we connect it all across your systems. And be honest in the comments. If you had to rebuild your main product today from your current records, could you? That answer is the most important one in this whole module.
Digital transformation time. Digital transformation time.